talking tonight about how can I best manage my conflict with others. I don't know about you, but there have been plenty of times when I've been faced with conflict, and whether it's in the home or and conflict isn't bad, I mean, it really isn't. We tend to think about it as bad, and then also, and it can become bad. But whether it be in the home or in the church or at work or wherever that you might find yourself, that it's easy to be in a situation where you find yourself in conflict with someone else. And it's important to learn those skills on how to best manage your conflict with others. So we're going to be talking about that tonight. I want to bring in my guest this evening. And so there she is. What?
I don't know.
Can you move your? We I've been trying to convince her on how to adjust the camera so that she's not off screen, and she keeps on moving it exactly in the wrong direction. And so I tell her, move it in the opposite direction, and then she just continues to move it in that direction. And so, so we were having a little bit of conflict about that. So, but certainly learning how to manage your conflict with others is an important life skill. Whether you're a Christian or not, it's an important life skill to learn. The problem is that very often that we really have not been taught well on how to manage conflict with others. And instead, we just kind of grew up in our family of origin and watched them, how they did it. How about, and this is not to disparage anything on your family, but in your family of origin, Janice, how did they approach conflict?
Either ignore it or scream and yell, and then it was over. Yeah. I
remember when I was growing up, and there were really some very tense times when, and I'm grateful that, and we were talking about this just a little bit earlier today, that I'm grateful that for the family that I had, certainly it was dysfunctional, but compared to what some kids grow up today, in the homes that they're growing up today, is that it was, it was a wonderfully functional family, or at least compared to that. But I remember a couple times, and I've told these stories before, but that it seemed like that the conflict that my mom and dad would get in these arguments, and it was almost always when we had pizza.
Is that why you want to do pizza night?
Yeah, well, yes, it's good to have a pizza night, although that we had a delicious little homemade bean soup tonight, and so I enjoyed that. So with a quesadilla. So that's your dog honking over there.
I know. I can't make her leave.
I know, that's fine. So, but I remember we had like it was like an island in the kitchen that was our table. And I recall that one night my mom and dad got into this big old fuss. And my mom was at one side, down from the kitchen, through the laundry room, and into the landing, is what we called it. It was actually like a mud room. And my dad was with the cupboards at the kitchen. And they started chucking Pepsi bottles at each other. So, and it's really just lucky that they didn't connect, because they weren't just playing catch. it was more like dodgeball. So,
Right.
and and here was my approach, because it was very chaotic. And so what I did is I just kind of like froze, and I sat there and I'm thinking, okay, that maybe if I pretend like I'm not here, that nothing's going to happen. So,
You
but
probably should have got under the table.
yeah, well, you actually couldn't get under that table. It didn't. It had like a thing underneath it, but yeah. And if I tried to move out, that who knows, I would have, because I was actually on the line of fire side. Is that my my other two brothers, if I recall correctly, were on the other side, and so they were out of the line of fire, but I was on the line of fire side. So, but but and I know that also, and I have to just tell this one other story, that that it would seem, because we were not a church going family. Now you were, right?
Yeah.
You know, which is, by the way, interesting, because church going families and not church going families don't necessarily have healthy ways. Just because you go to church doesn't mean you have a healthy way of managing conflict.
Right.
You know, so that but the other scenarios I remember growing up as a kid is that from time to time, for whatever reason, it was never something that was really big in our family, that to go to church. But from whatever reason, my mom decided that we were going to go to church, and my dad just went ballistic. And I remember him coming into my bedroom, and there was some sort of big shouting match, and I don't know exactly what the content of it, but I remember he's so stinking mad that he kicked the wall and put a hole in it. Needless to say, we didn't go to church that day. So
Yeah, you think.
my mom did repair the wall, and she put a brick behind that hole.
Smart woman.
so, so it's just crazy, the stuff that you go through. I've said it before, that the reason why God gives us parents is for us to have something to recover from when we become adults.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Bonnie's with us tonight, so I'm glad she's able to join us in the broadcast. And the chats are working this evening, so that's good. So, but so what would happen after your parents would have, or after your family would have a conflict or a blow up? What then would happen following that?
Nothing. They would just act like nothing happened, and now we're all friends again.
Yeah. And so there was no apology, no making amends or anything like that, right? How did that change when you got married?
Yeah. Yeah, the first time we had a conflict and I acted like I did at home, then you were like, you didn't yell back at me or anything. You're just quiet. And then I went in the other room and I'm like, okay, it's over. And I come back in and you're still mad. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? You're like, you didn't even apologize. I'm like, I have to apologize for this? Get over it, dude.
That's not how we do it, homie.
Right.
So, yeah. Well, it's crazy. It's crazy what families do, and it's crazy how they manage or mismanage
But I
conflict.
think that a lot of the reason why we were the way we were is because my parents' parents were the way they were.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, your mom grew up in essentially, I mean, this isn't, I'm not trash talking your grandparents, but she grew up in an alcoholic family, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of alcohol abuse in that family. And your dad grew up in a home where it was an impoverished family, and there was 10 kids in the family, right?
And their dad died really young.
Yeah, he died. How old was he? Do you recall?
I think he was 40 something.
Yeah, yeah. So Bonnie said that my brother and I were raised to be seen but not heard. So,
Mm.
I think that that's true for a lot of kids in our
Mm-hmm.
generation. And our job was to be seen and not heard. And so,
Yeah,
eh,
with my dad, there was no there was no like change in his mind. If he decided something, he'd just be like, "That's what I said. Just do it."
yeah,
And you're like, "But, nope."
no, no, no. He was a
Mm.
pretty stubborn guy.
Yeah,
So, and that's an important lesson to learn, is that just because you're a Christian and your dad was very active, involved in the church, doesn't mean that your personality skills or your character, your personality, or your conflict management skills are fully mature. They need growth, change, development. You know,
yeah.
so.
And you know that having the 10 kids in the family,
Mm-hmm.
7 were girls.
Wow. Yeah. I feel.
Poor guy.
Yeah. I feel sorry for him. So, but well, let's just go ahead and we'll jump in with the lesson tonight, and let's just do like we normally do, and we'll alternate. That I'll read a screen, and then you can read a screen, and we'll work our way through the content that way. So, oops, wrong screen. There we go. How can I best manage my conflict with others? And so I'll start. To successfully manage conflict, make sure that you arm yourself with a Christ like attitude. Be humble and protect the unity of the church. Paul says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. So Christian unity is far too important to destroy over, I might as well take the next slide then, differences or disagreements. Concerning division, Paul writes, don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit lives in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him, for God's temple is sacred, and you are that temple. By the way, I just want to point out there in that passage of Scripture, there's a couple places where Paul uses that analogy. But in that passage of Scripture where he talks about you are, don't you, he says you yourselves know. He's talking, he's using the plural pronoun there. And so the idea is that all of the Christians, in this particular case at the church in Corinth, are God's temple. You know, Christianity, people make a mistake when they talk about going to church. We are the church. And God's temple is that we are God's temple. But it's not only our individual lives, which Paul talks about later on in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 6, but also our corporate lives is that we're God's temple. And he says something here that is always kind of really, I don't know if I say, and giving me cause to pause. How about that? And he says that if anyone destroys God's temple, so if you create division in the church, God will destroy him, for God's temple is sacred, and you are that temple. Guard against the temptation to escalate your personal conflicts into a church war. And there have been far, far too many times when Christians and churches have gone through conflict that they've escalated into an entire war, And so we ourselves, we kind of have had some negative experiences with that ourselves. But so Janice, can you see the screen there? Can you read the next one?
Yeah. Here's an important principle worth remembering. Not every religious disagreement, even if it's a matter of conscience, is a matter of right versus wrong. That's hard for many Christians to believe, but read Romans 14. There, Paul describes believers who passionately hold completely opposite viewpoints on certain spiritual issues. He urges these Christians who see these religious matters differently to accept one another without passing judgment on or condemning each other. Sure, sometimes you have to draw the line, but take care when you do. Make sure it's a line God would want drawn.
Yeah, you and I, you grew up in a church, and I was converted in a church where, like everything, every minor issue was a major thing, and you had to agree on all of that stuff. And that's really toxic in so many respects. And I'm glad that we have gotten past that in our own personal lives. And, we serve a church where there is, it doesn't have that same spirit. But, there is what I would consider to be some core elements that are non-negotiables for Christians. I would say the person and nature of God, that or the nature of God, that He's triune, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the person and nature and work of Christ, that Jesus is the Son of God. He is fully God and truly human, and that his death on the cross is really the sole basis for our right standing before God. Some of those other things, but there's just not a whole long list that I have anymore, where I would say, I, I've traveled enough, I've been to enough places where I've seen God at work, and He's at work amongst people, Christians, who have a very, they're kind of like a very rudimentary understanding of God. And, some of these things that American Christians or Christians in the West squabble over quite a bit. So make sure that the lines that you draw are lines that God would want drawn. Let me go ahead and read the next one here. It says, when it comes to resolving your differences with others, remember Jesus teaches that regardless of who's at fault, you have the responsibility to initiate reconciliation. You have the responsibility to initiate reconciliation. And that's something that I think is true not just in the church, but also in our interpersonal relationships, is that a lot of times when we are the injured party, we feel that, well, I'm just going to sit here and be injured until the offender comes and makes an overture to reconcile. I see somewhat of a little bit of a smile on your face.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot in marriage.
Yeah, So, but what it's saying there is that, and what Jesus teaches is that whether you are the offender or the injured party, it's your responsibility to seek a path of reconciliation if reconciliation is possible, and sometimes it's not. So let's go back to that screen. It says that's not always easy to do, but doing what's right isn't always easy. Take the first steps towards reconciliation. Be a peacemaker, is what Jesus teaches us. So, Janice?
Don't, however, skirt the truth. Speak it. When you've been hurt, talk about your hurt. When you've been wronged, talk about the wrong. Call sin, sin. But remember that when you speak the truth, do what Paul says and speak it in love. Probably no advice is more important than this if you want to successfully manage conflict.
Hey, I have to tell a story. And by the way, I think we're probably just going to be in a place where we have to take this lesson in parts, because there's a lot of content, and I'm just not going to rush it through just for the sake of getting through it. But I remember when I was preaching once, and that I don't know if you remember this story. It was in my first ministry, and it was at a special event. They called them rallies back in the days. And
Yeah.
so I had spoken at a rally, and when I had finished speaking, that some older Christian fella who was visiting from another church took it upon himself to begin correcting me in what he thought that how I didn't speak correctly about certain Bible teachings. I don't know if you remember that or not, but I'll
Oh
tell you.
yeah, he was sitting right behind me.
So he just called me out and it started to redress me right there in the church service. And, I don't even recall what it was all about, but I just remember that number one, it was kind of in bad taste. And number two is I don't think that his point had any merit, you know. So how they did that back in the day is that they'd have different speakers come up, and I happened to be one of the speakers. And then when we we'd take a break and we'd have a potluck, And so I remember standing in line for the potluck, and he said, "Hey, brother, come on over here and let me give you a hug," type of thing. And I said, "No,
No, thank you.
we're not gonna paper over this difference just with a hug." Now I wasn't being mean to him, but I just said, we're just not gonna paper over this with a hug, and so and whether or not I was right or wrong, that's not the point. Here's the point that I'm driving at is that when you've been hurt and when you've been wronged, you can call sin. You can you don't have to kind of like it's kind of like when you're growing up, give your brother a hug,
So you're sorry.
say
Now
you're sorry.
hug.
Yeah, now everything's okay, but so we need to speak the truth, but we need to do so in love. I wasn't mean to him. I just said, no, we're not going to paper over this difference just with a hug. So, but I don't think that, things were ever worked out. But, it's just one of those things. So, but, so let's just go ahead with the next screen here. Janice?
In Matthew 18, Jesus outlines the steps to take when you've been sinned against. First, deal with the matter directly and privately. Go and show him his fault, says the Lord, in verse 15. If that doesn't work, take one or two others along, verse 16. And if you're still unsuccessful in working things out, enlist the help of the church.
Yeah. So, yes, conflict is a fact of life, even the Christian life. But armed with Christ-like attitudes and the wise counsel found in God's Word, you can successfully manage conflict when it comes your way. So our first question here tonight is, when conflict exists between Christians, why do you think that they often deny there's a problem or avoid dealing with it?
I think that, they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Maybe they think sometimes I've thought, well, if I talk to this person, they're going to be mad at me and they're not going to be my friend anymore. They might quit coming to church, so I am cautious about talking to people like that. Or maybe it's because we just don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, all of those things. That I think Christians oftentimes, first of all, I think that Christians often think that conflict is a sin. Just the mere presence of conflict is a sin, and it's not.
Well, and it's like even in the lesson that it's going to talk about it eventually, but everybody's like, you're not supposed to judge anyone, So like, are you judging me by saying this and that, And so, it gets into this whole thing, And what you accuse me of all the time is I think that
we got some marriage issues that we're working out here publicly.
No, this is true.
Okay.
You always are telling me that you cannot settle conflict by talking to someone other than the person you have the conflict with.
Yeah, you know what they call that, don't you?
triangulation.
You sound a little embittered there.
A little annoyed.
Yeah. Well, it's true. I guess another word for it would be gossip, you know. Unless, of course, you're going to the other person and saying, I'm really stuck on this and I don't know how to find the on ramp to have a conversation with so and so. And so I'm not asking you and I'm not coming to you because I'm gossiping about this. I just don't know how to manage this in a healthy way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that I'm actually going to be teaching a webinar on conflict now. We just made that decision today to do that, and so we're going to be pulling the pieces of the puzzle together to do that. But over the years, I really believe that I've learned, not because I'm so smart myself, but I borrow material wherever I can find it, you know. But I really believe I've learned how to do conflict better, and the kind of some very helpful tips. And I'm going to be passing those along in that webinar when we do that. But I think you're right that Christians, first of all, Christians think that having conflicts is sin, and it's not. And that then they also are afraid. Fear comes in, and they think that it's going to just blow up in their faces, and most of the time it does. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
You know. But but I do think you can minimize that by learning how to diffuse the bomb. You know.
Yeah. I
And
started talking to people like, you can kind of get a vibe from
mm-hmm,
people if they're offended, they might, be a little cool with you or whatever,
mm-hmm,
Or even if just in my heart I'm thinking, man, maybe the way I said that was really harsh or,
mm-hmm,
whatever.
yeah,
I've decided I'm not going to sit around and worry about it anymore.
mm-hmm,
I just go to the person and say, you know what, I've been thinking about this, and I think when I said this or that, it was a little harsh, and I just wanted to let you know that I never intended it to be that way, and I
mm-hmm,
hope that your feelings weren't hurt, and if they were, I apologize, and I just do it, you
mm-hmm,
know, and the same as if I feel like they're being cold to me, I could just say, I don't know if anything's happened, but it seems
mm-hmm,
like you might be a little bit angry with me. Did I do something that offended you?
mm-hmm. When are you going to start doing that in our marriage? I love it when you roll your eyes at me. So, okay.
You're
All
supposed to
right.
be able to read my mind by now.
I know, man. You know. Oops, wrong one. Let's do this. Conflict arises for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's the inevitable consequence of the incompatibility between good and evil. Sometimes it occurs when good people simply see things differently, according to James 4 1 through 3. So let's bring that Bible passage up. James 4. Let me get there, man.
I have it.
Go ahead, read that, please.
Okay. Why do you fight and argue among yourselves? Isn't it because of your sinful desires? They fight within you. You want something, but you don't have it. So you kill. You want what others have, but you can't get what you want. So you argue and fight. You don't have what you want because you don't ask God. When you do ask for something, you don't receive it. That's because you ask for the wrong reason. You want to spend your money on your sinful pleasures.
Okay. So, um, um, what he's saying there, he says, read verse 3 again. You don't.
When you do ask for something, you don't receive it. That's because you ask for the wrong reason. You want to spend your money on your sinful pleasures.
Is that what it says in your translation? You want to spend your money?
Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty. So, okay.
That's
Kind of,
that's a reader's one.
Okay.
the International
Yeah,
Readers.
gotcha. Backing up just a bit is that obviously in the book of James here he is talking about sinful conflict, but but there but not all conflict is sinful. We see that actually a good example of that was Paul's conflict with Barnabas over whether or not John Mark should go with them on their second missionary tour,
Mm-hmm.
and they just disagreed. Barnabas said yeah, and Paul said no. So and actually the whole thing went south from there. And as far as we know, they never had contact with each other um,
Hmm.
afterwards. But so I don't know if it's because they wrote each other out of their lives as much as that they just never did connect. But sometimes good people see things differently. According to James 3, what another reason that conflict exists between people, and according to that passage, it's that because they want to. It's essentially selfishness, and so it's ends up being I just want what I want because I want it, and you're kind of standing in my way of it, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So
It
it
kind
says
of
in this.
infers though something you want something that they have that you wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So okay, in this passage, James mentions how the wrong type of prayer only serves to increase conflict. What type of prayer might work to minimize conflict? So he says there in that passage, let's see, the wrong type of prayer is that you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. And even when you do ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So the wrong type of prayer is to have bad motives. But
Mm-hmm.
what type of prayer might minimize conflict?
I think praying for that person or praying that God would give you wisdom and love in
Mm-hmm.
the situation, patience.
Yeah. So we can pray for the person, but we can also pray and I like what you said, pray for insight. Uh, you know, Here's what I believe is that we can, and I really believe this, is that we can always manage our conflicts with other people. We can always do that, or we could theoretically always do that in a healthy way. But that doesn't mean we're going to get the results that we desire. You know, we could we could do all of the right things in managing the conflict, and that person still be mad at them. And um, you know, so what are you going to do? So Bonnie says here, praying that my heart is soft and in tune with their feelings, working to understand their side. So that's good. Yeah. There's a saying that says, seek first to be understood. Oh, no, actually, I got that exactly backwards.
Yeah.
Seek first to understand and then to be understood. You know. Okay. So read James 3:16. Do you have that handy, Janice?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's are you jealous? Are you concerned only about getting ahead? Then your life will be a mess. You will be doing all kinds of evil things.
Okay. So, what attitude does James say produce disorder in everything in every evil practice?
Being jealous and thinking of getting ahead because it's
Mm-hmm.
always going to be a competition with conflict.
Yeah. And how might these attitudes contribute to a climate of conflict between persons? Here's one thought: is that it's hard to feel at ease with a person that you don't believe they have your best interests at heart.
Mm-hmm.
There's been plenty of times where I felt like people are manipulating me or using, trying to, jockey me into the place where they want me to be, rather than truly seeking my best interests.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that's going to complicate things. So, oops, hit the wrong button. I think we'll make this our last question, because I think the other ones are coming up. There's a whole bunch of verses on some of these. So in Romans 12:18, do you have that handy?
Yeah.
Okay.
If possible, live in peace with everyone. Do that as much as you can, because sometimes no matter what you do, you can't change how the other person thinks about you.
Yeah, boy, isn't that good? That you can do all of the right stuff, and them still have, the other person still have a wrong spirit. So, and I think that this is really, in all honesty, when you're a kid, and you grow up in a dysfunctional home, and you're constantly getting this vibe from your parents that you're bad, or there's something wrong with you, or whatever else, is that you just you non-critically accept their judgment, rather than stepping back from that and thinking, wait a minute, maybe the problem's with them and not with me. But and so Paul says, as much as that lies within you, or is possible within you, live at peace. He's not saying that we need to we don't need to give in to others when it comes to principled matters. But he says there's, as far as it's possible, depends on you. Why do you think Paul added this qualification?
What, to live in peace with everyone?
No, the as much as possible.
Oh, as much as you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not always. There's times when you can do everything you can do, and still, it's not going to be resolved. So you can only do what you can do.
You can only do what you can do, and with that, we're going to wrap up our conversation tonight. It's a good place to stop. We're going to pick up next week on this this topic of conflict. But anything that you would like to say before we wrap up, as you think about this issue of conflict?
No.
Yeah. Here's a couple of things that I would like to say. Is that I think that I would say mastering this skill, or at least really growing in this skill, is fundamentally important to having healthy relationships. And I do not think that, I think that very, very few people learn that in their family of origin. And quite honestly, I think that very few people are taught that in the church. And so we need to figure out ways on how to do that. And like I say, I'm going to be holding a webinar. I'll be announcing that coming up. But I would encourage folks, if they can, to join me for that. So Janice, here's what I'm going to offer for you this evening.
Oh boy.
So, all right. Well, I hope to see you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in, and that's it for now. And I appreciate each person who watches. And, share the news or share the word about all of this. Bonnie added this. And with that, so Bonnie added this. And with that, I'm going to do this. So, all right. Take care. Bye bye for now.